So we're going to jump back into our professional development workshop with a presentation from Dr. Philip Schurman, who is a professor in the Department of Environmental Health at East Tennessee State University. He's going to talk to you all today about delivering effective scientific presentations. So Dr. Schurman, thank you so much for joining us today, and feel free to share your screen and take it away.
Okay, so today we're going to spend a little time talking about delivering effective scientific presentations. So what we'll talk about first is a little bit about why we make technical or scientific presentations, a little bit about what makes a good presentation, and then a little bit about organization of your presentation. A common theme that you're going to hear throughout my presentation today is that you want to keep things simple, clear, and available for a diverse audience in terms of understanding, background, and interests. So why do we communicate scientific findings? Well, stuff that we learn when we do various types of research and other studies, data collection, or even program development is not useful unless we communicate it to others. If it's just in our little small realm of our head or a small group, and we don't get it out to the wider audience, then it's not of much use. So we want to communicate to the science community, to policymakers, and to the public. And in environmental health, there's a lot of interaction with the public through public hearings, call-ins when people have questions or concerns about various types of things. So you need to learn quickly how to deal with this diverse audience of the highly technical science community, maybe slightly more technically aware policymakers, and then the public, which will have a wide range of background and interests. And regardless of your career choice, your sub-discipline within environmental health and what sector you go into, whether it's industry, government, or academia, you're going to have to present information that you learn to these varied audiences. And so you want to be good at it. The other thing that we've learned through many surveys done by professional organizations, individual institutions, individual faculty you can find in the published literature, usually on the top three categories of things employers are working for are communication skills. Among those, the ability to speak well and to write well. And I contend that you can't write well if you don't speak well, and you can't speak well if you don't write well. So they both kind of go hand in hand with one another. So how clearly you communicate is as important or as much as how much you know. If you do a poor job of communicating it, no matter what you know, no matter how smart you are, the message doesn't get across. And so people don't learn what it is you're trying to get them to learn. And when they're judging you, your performance, your presentation, if it's not done well, then they don't think that there was very much there for them to learn. When we're presenting to wide audiences, we need to remember that we have people with varying skills and understanding of the discipline. So if we make things too complicated, we're going to lose people. We need to avoid jargon. Where technical terms and jargon are important, you need to define them very carefully and very clearly. And you want to define and explain difficult concepts to the part of your audience that you expect is going to know the least about that. The other important thing is you need a message. You want to communicate something, and in almost any presentation, you want to keep the main message or the key points that you want your audience to take away to ideally about 3, but certainly no more than 5 main points. You start getting more points than 5, people aren't going to grasp everything, and they're not going to get your whole message. Generally, you can find 3 of the most important points and focus on those. And even if there are some other things you think your audience should know, those can come up through the question answer session. Those can come up with follow-up presentations. But you want to, in your presentation, have no more than 5 main points you want to get across to the audience. And you're going to design your presentation around those points. So the more points you have, the more complicated your presentation is, the longer your presentation is. And another known thing is that if we go too long, we start losing people because they lose interest. Okay, so throughout this presentation, and in fact, very quickly, I'm going to show you a couple of slides that are things that you don't want to do. And there are other things in this presentation that are probably not the ideal way to present things. And so your task is to try and identify those, and then think about those and think about how they affected your ability to get the message. And thinking about those, and then thinking about how you would do it differently in your own presentations, I think will help you develop some skills towards how to best plan a presentation. So every presentation has to start out with some kind of introduction. You want to make the audience understand and buy into what you want to say, so you have to make it important to them. That's the introduction. Then you're going to present and discuss your results, your ideas, your plans, whatever it is that encompasses those 3 to 5 main messages. And then you're going to close with a summary and conclusions. You're going to summarize those 3 main ideas. And if you've collected data and analyzed data and you've drawn some conclusions, you want to state those conclusions and make them clear to the audience. So in the introduction, we're trying to introduce the relevancy of the topic to the audience. I started out telling you, why do we make presentations? Because we need to communicate what we learn and what we know to a wide audience, so that people understand and can participate in making decisions about their own lives, about policy, etc. It gets the audience involved. It tells them why they care. And you'll probably, in your introduction, if you've thought about it carefully, every audience member will hear something in that introduction that kind of piques their interest or ties into why they were there to hear your talk in the first place. Then you want to tell them what you're going to talk about. And again, I'm going to reemphasize many times, most people remember no more than 5 key points from any presentation. So when you're telling them what you're going to talk about, you want to keep it to 5 or less. And again, generally around 3 is going to be the ideal kind of sweet point. In a close, you're going to summarize those key points. You're going to state your conclusion, make it relevant to your audience. How does that conclusion impact their job, their lives, whatever it is they care about, and why they're there to hear your talk? So this is the first example of what you don't do. You want to use what I call the KISS principle, or you've probably heard this before: keep it simple, stupid. This slide has far too much text on it. It has distracting little graphics that don't really line up with the talk exactly. And so your audience is sitting there trying to read this, trying to look at those graphics, and trying to hear what you say. They're not going to be able to do that. So they're either not going to hear what you're saying, because they're going to spend all their time trying to read the slide, or they're going to hear what you're saying and not read the slide. So there's no real reason to put all of this full sentence text on a single slide with a lot of things that will distract the audience. And I'll come back and talk about this in a little bit, a little more, because I've divided these back out into a little bit better presentation of the KISS principle. And then there are the 10 deadly sins of communication. And this slide is an example of probably how you don't want to present what is a very important concept and group of ideas for the audience to take home. The background color is not going to project well in a room. It's not going, probably doesn't project well on all computer screens. And then we've put this kind of bluish white text over it that we're bringing in point by point with this very dark heading. And again, the audience is not going to be able to follow this. They're not going to be able to read it. And so now you've created a distraction and kind of a, do I listen to the speaker? Do I try and figure out what's on this slide that I'm having a hard time reading? And I put all 10 points on one slide. And that's going to be difficult for the audience to follow that idea. There we go. So keep your slides simple. Very minimal text, just bullet points, short sentences, something that someone can grasp in a single view. Use high contrast color schemes. Now I like black on white. You could do other high contrast color schemes as long as they're high contrast and they're not colors that some members of the audience might have trouble seeing because of color blindness or other issues and that don't project well. You want to stay focused on your message. You don't want to get into too many tangents, and you want to make sure you're familiar with the equipment that you will be using. So if you've never used Zoom before, you want to practice with Zoom. If you're making a presentation at a conference or at another institution or in another office somewhere, you want to know what kind of equipment they're going to have and make sure you know how it works. And so, you know, if you can, you want to get there early and learn how to use it. Because one of the other, as we'll see when I talk about the 10 deadly sins of communication, one of the important ones is looking unorganized and unprepared. And if you don't know how to use the equipment, people are gonna look unorganized and unprepared. Figures, graphs are better than tables and numbers. Pictures are often better than a lot of words. So where possible, use simple figures and graphs. If you've collected a lot of data and there are only 3 numbers in the table of 200 data points, don't show the whole table. Show those 3 numbers and talk about why they're important. Most often we're trying to look at relationships between things. So simple graphs like bar charts, pie charts, things of that nature, not complex graphs with a lot going on with a lot of panels. Try and stay away from the complex data tables. Now, in a lot of scientific presentations, what people do is they've written a report, a thesis, a paper, and they've created tables and they've created graphs that the reader is going to have more time to study, and they've developed it with that in mind. And then they put those same tables and graphs in their presentation where the reader's not going to have a lot of time to look at that graph. They're only going to have as much time as you talk about that graph. And there may only be 1 or 2 things you want them to get out of the graph. So think about redoing your figures and redoing your tables differently than you might have had in your reports to keep them simpler so it's easier for the audience to see them. We've all been, or maybe you haven't, but you will be sometime in your career at a presentation where someone will put up a 20 row by 10 column table and say, now all I really want you to look at is this number down here buried in the very middle. And you can't see it because everything's too small. And they would have made their message much clearer if they would just have pulled that number out and talked about why it was important. So the 10 deadly sins of communication: appearing unprepared. You want to practice your presentation. You want to think about your audience. You want to learn as much as you can about your audience, so you make your presentation to match that audience and their skill levels and their understanding. Handling questions improperly. Make sure you understand the question before you answer it. Again, we've all either already been in a presentation, or you will be in a presentation where someone in the audience asks the question and the speaker says something that is completely off track of what the question was. The speaker is answering the question they hoped the person would have asked, or they thought the person was going to ask, not the question that was asked. So make sure you understand the question so you answer the question specifically. Don't apologize for yourself or your organization. You're in this presentation, the expert. You're presenting what you have found, what you have learned. Not everybody's going to agree with it. That's okay. Not everybody's going to accept all of your message. That's okay. But there's no need to apologize for that. And often where you see people apologizing the most is coming back to this idea that I talked about, where you got a table with 10 rows and, or what I say, 20 rows and 10 columns. And they want you to look at one and they'll go, you know, I know this table is hard to read and I'm sorry, but it's this point down here. Well, they haven't thought about the audience. So at least half the people in the audience already are going to be turned off. And they've apologized for doing that. So it's obvious they knew it wasn't a good idea. So they've put themselves in the case where they're not going to be heard by a lot of people in the audience. Not knowing knowable information. You want to anticipate what questions are. You want to anticipate what the audience is going to be interested in, and you should be able to answer the bulk of the questions, because most of the questions will be things that you should know. Now, there are going to be questions that you don't know the answer to. That's not a crime. Somebody will ask you something that you didn't think about, or they will be thinking in a different direction. Don't answer that question dishonestly and try and make an answer up. Say, I don't know, but I'll get back to you, and then follow up. Unprofessional use of audiovisual aids. Again, I'm using these, too many cute little emotes, things like that, can in certain situations appear to be unprofessional. Seeming to be off schedule. Practice your talk. Know how long it should take. Know where you should be at various points time-wise, and somehow track your time. Involve the participants. And one way to involve the participants, hard to do on Zoom, but certainly in a live setting, look in their eyes. Look at the audience. Pay attention to the audience, and you can kind of glean whether they're catching your message and understanding what you're saying, but also encourage them to ask questions. Make sure you're letting them know that you understand what their concerns are or their interests are. Keep them involved. Establish a rapport. When it's live and you go before, try and talk to some of the people in the audience before you start talking, if you can. Appearing disorganized. And again, the biggest way you appear disorganized is to not have the equipment ready, not know how to use the equipment. All of us have been to many talks, or will be to many talks, where person brings in a jump drive or emails a presentation and they can't get it open. They can't figure out how to make it work. And one of the deadly sins with PowerPoint is embedding video. Make sure that embedded video works. More times than not, it won't. And so again, this looks disorganized and unprepared. And providing the wrong content. You want to make sure that you're talking about what the audience is interested in and what you promised to deliver to them. I will also say that whether it's a technical or scientific presentation or a non-technical, more general interest presentation, all these same ideas and concepts apply. You got to start out with just the basics of having a story, telling it simply, and telling it to your audience and understanding that audience. So when you're planning your presentation, you need to plan online versus in person. Online audience interaction is much more difficult. Everyone is viewing through different equipment. What looks good on your screen may not look good on somebody else's smaller screen or on a laptop screen, or, you know, there may even be somebody in here watching this through Zoom on their phone. Put too much on a slide and on the small screen, they may not be able to see it. So think about that. If you're in person, things that you're interested in is the audience size, how big the room is, and that isn't to say the audience size isn't important in an online presentation, but in an in-person presentation, there's going to be a lot more interaction, so you need to be more aware of how many people. You may want to take handouts, for example. What's the audience interest? Try and figure out why they're there, what they care about. Are they forced to be there because their boss told them to be there? Are they there because this is something that impacts them in their personal lives or their professional lives? And then how long you have for your presentation. If in person, again, make sure you know what equipment's going to be used. Make sure you understand how the audience is going to be seated. Is it going to be auditorium seating, or is it going to be in the round where everybody's sitting in a big circle? How big is the room? How far does your material have to project? How loud are you going to have to project? Are there visual obstacles? This is probably true on many campuses, but on our campuses, we have a couple rooms where lectures are held where there are columns right in the middle of the room. And you have to take that into account when you're projecting things and where people are sitting. Lighting, who's going to control the lighting? If you need them, electrical outlets, if you're bringing your own projector or your own equipment, will you be able to plug it in? Those are all things that you want to think about and know a little bit about in advance. Not knowing these is where you look unorganized and unprepared. If it's online, what software will it be used? Is it going to be Zoom? Is it going to be WebEx? Is it going to be Teams? And how do those work? And they all work differently. Who controls the ability to share the screen and use the virtual whiteboard? And will you have access to both of those when you get ready to make your presentation? These will control what you might want to do. If you don't know if you're going to have access to the virtual whiteboard, you don't want to plan to use the virtual whiteboard in your talk. If someone else is going to share the screen for you, you need to understand how to take control of that shared screen and how that's done. Okay. So when you prepare it, start with your last slide. What is the message you want the audience to take home? And then you're going to build your talk around that last slide, that last message. So you want to write out your conclusions or summary slide first. You want to identify the key points you want the audience to learn, and then you start building everything that goes in ahead of that to make that message understood by the audience. Keep things simple. Even the most brilliant people are going to have a hard time following you if you're making things too complex, if you're talking too fast, if you're tend to get off target and tell a lot of side stories. Keep it simple and direct to your message. Use clear language to state each point. Use verbal and visual evidence to make your point. Develop a logical transition or bridge to your next point. Rehearse your presentation. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. may be helpful to practice with similar equipment. Don't memorize everything. Know what you want to say. If you're using PowerPoints, you certainly have speaker notes. You want to use notes. You want to use them sparingly, but you can use the slides as your key. So again, the simpler the slides are, the more they're bulleted, the easier is for you to track whether you're on target and you're following your message. But if you memorize it, you're probably going to present it as if it's memorized, which means it's going to come out monotone. And also, if you memorize it and you slip up and forget a point, you get so worried about, you knew you were supposed to make a point, but you can't remember what it was now, and you had it memorized, that you get off track and start appearing a little bit unorganized and unsure of what you're saying. Look at the audience. If you have fear, look at one or two people, put a friend in the back of the room, but as best you can, try and look at everyone. Make sure you use large type and clear fonts. So, this is 28-point Helvetica. This is 28-point Harlow solid italic. These are both 28-point, but you can see one is bolder than the other. And these are 10-point fonts, which in most situations are going to be hard for people to read off of a slide. Use enough space between lines so that the lines it's easy for people to see each bullet. At 32-point font, there are about 8 words per line. A mixed case is better than all uppercase. Every word should be readable from the back of the room or on the smallest screen that someone would be using. So effective visual aids, pictures, graphs, and tables, they're able to stand alone. So all the information that you need to explain it and for the audience to understand it needs to be on that graph or that picture. You want it to illustrate a key concept, not a bunch of concepts, not 2 or 3, a key concept. You may use similar graphs to explain related key concepts, but try and keep each picture to one idea. Where possible, use pictures or graphics instead of words. Conform to the 6 words per line, maximum 10 lines per visual maximum. On your PowerPoint slides, again, short phrases or key words, highlight important points, represent the facts accurately, and keep them clear, clean, and uncluttered to have impact. Colored backgrounds and these geometric shapes around your slides are pretty, and they're interesting, and they may help part of the audience pay attention, but another part of the audience will be distracted by them. So make sure you choose those carefully to not be overbearing over just what it is on the slide. You want the audience to get, remembering they're not going to have very much time to look at that slide. So simple, clear, relevant, specific. Usually graphs are better than tables. This applies to graphs and tables. This applies to slides. This applies to everything in your talk. Simple, clear, relevant, and specific. When you speak, make sure you project. You may have a microphone. You may not have a microphone. Make sure your intensity of your voice reflects your confidence, competence, and openness. You're not in a monotone. You're not mumbling. You're not speaking quietly. You're also not shouting. You need to talk in a confident, projected tone. Watch your audience for feedback when you can. On an online forum, that's hard to do. In person, it's much easier to do. And adjust to the surroundings. Make sure you practice how to speak all the difficult words as part of your practicing. Enunciate and pronunciate clearly. Speak distinctly and correctly. Be careful with unfamiliar words. Spell and define terms as appropriate. All of us have some words that we stumble on. All of us have when we're talking and thinking and developing a presentation, if it's a difficult word, a scientific name of an organism or a chemical species or something, we'll slip up on pronouncing them, simply because there's a lot going on in our head as we try and make this presentation. So as much as you can practice those different things in advance, the more confident you are, the more they're familiar with you, just like the word "the" or "careful" or words, the less likely you are to mispronounce those terms. Pace, rhythm, and pitch. Vary your tempo. Speak slowly to emphasize key messages. Sometimes it's okay to even repeat that key message. Pause for emphasis. Vary your voice pattern, length of phrases. Avoid repeating words like okay, like, not, and or you know what I mean, or do you understand? Just say the point clearly with varied volume and tempo, and show interest, and you'll do fine. Facial expressions, eye contact. Eye contact is crucial. You've got to look at audience members in person. Your mouth, eyes, forehead, eyebrows also communicate. Your facial expressions are important. Another important one, which I give this in person, I demonstrate by leaning against the door, folding my arms, and kind of looking down. All that body language says, I'm not interested in this talk. I'm not interested in talking to you, and I don't care whether you get it or not. And that's just not a good, effective delivery of your message. Posture communicates your attitude. Again, folded arms, leaning against something. Try to have a straight stance with legs slightly apart. It's okay to move around a little bit, as long as you don't move too fast and you're not too distracting. And in a big room, it's moving from side to side can be good because you can look at different parts of the audience. It's okay to use your hands for expression, but just don't make it overly done. Don't rattle your keys, fiddle with your pen, or fiddle with your pointer. And if you're nervous and it's in person, don't use a pointer. As soon as that laser pointer hits the screen, it's going to show you're nervous. So gestures can enhance or detract depending upon how you use them. Be aware of yours and make sure that you're not causing distraction. When you're practicing, have people there watching that can give you hints and inputs on what you're saying and where you might be distracting and where you might not be clear, and those types of issues. You want to dress professionally. You want to dress as the audience would expect you to dress. If you're going to dress incorrectly, maybe a little overdressed is better than underdressed. You don't want to go in shorts and a t-shirt to a presentation that might lead to a job or might lead to funding for a project or something of that nature. Again, avoid these repetitive gestures, checking your watch, jingling your keys, pacing, overly pacing, walking back and forth at a moderate pace is okay, but over pacing and looking down at the floor is probably not a good idea. So when you answer questions, be prepared. Anticipate what the questions are going to be. You know the subject, you're the expert. Think about what people might want to know. And there will be things outside of your key messages that people may want to talk about. You need to be prepared to answer those. And as best you can, you need to bring those back to those 3 to 5 key messages, how that relates to the main points you want the audience to get. But answer the question that's being asked, not the question you hoped was being asked. Have the person, if you don't understand, have the person repeat it, or even better yet, you repeat it yourself, or as you understand it, and ask the person asking the question, am I understanding what you're asking? And also sometimes by repeating the question, you're helping the audience because they may not understand the question. So by rephrasing it and repeating it, you can help the audience understand what's being asked. Don't spend a lot of time answering any single question. less than 2 minutes. We've all also been to a presentation, or again, you will be at a presentation where a question is asked, and 15 minutes later, the speaker is ready to take another question, and there's limited time. And so people who had questions they want answered can't get them answered because the speaker took far too long answering the question. So this is a self-management thing. You need to listen, you need to be confident and factual, and you need to, if it's something that's maybe confrontational, you need to control your emotions and remain calm. And if you don't know, you don't know. You just say that, and then if you can, promise to follow up. So you speak and act with integrity. Tell the truth. If you don't know, say so. Follow up as promised. If you're unsure of a question, repeat or rephrase that, or paraphrase what you think the meaning of that question is, and let the person asking the question help you understand what they're asking, and make sure the entire audience has heard the question. So in summary, simple is better. Maximum 5 main points or ideas, 1 concept or idea per slide. Graphs are better than tables. Pictures are better where they're useful, as long as they're not overly done, simple, and they illustrate that one key point, and you need to be prepared.